US companies have invested. Other sectors invest also, but I'm saying as major investment. Now, if we look at what that means from a 65, next slide please. Yes, thank you. So if we look at what is the impact of $65 billion, we calculate that 94.1 billion increase in GDP between 2004 and 2012, and the creation of 1.74 million jobs in various sectors in Indonesia. These jobs are created not just by US companies, but created by companies that are part of the supply chain of US companies. So those jobs will not exist if US companies do not invest in Indonesia. So it's an important aspect to consider. 183,000 jobs are directly provided by US companies, but 1.74 million jobs is the direct impact on from the investment. In fact, the UGM has done a fantastic job in actually applying some, I have to read the social accounting metrics methodology. They've used a number of economic analysis to actually understand the numbers. And what we do know from that economic analysis is that for every national product output, there is, so for every dollar US invested, for every US dollar invested in Indonesia, there will be a $2.75 production output in Indonesia. So there is a multiplier impact for every dollar that US companies invest in Indonesia. If you look at national GDP, I'm giving the total figure, but for every dollar invested, there will be an additional GDP growth of $1.44 in relation to GDP growth. And for every $1 million invested in Indonesia, there is a creation of 20 jobs. So it's why the multiplier impact of foreign direct investment of US companies is quite dramatic. There are additional elements which may not be quantifiable, but it's quantifiable to a certain extent. But US companies also, next slide please. There is a secondary impact as well. So if you actually increase the state revenue, whether it's local government or national government, there is an opportunity for the government to invest more in infrastructure, education, health. So that dollar creates a multiplier impact as well. Transfer of knowledge. We know that US companies actually spend quite a considerable amount of money in developing and training their employees. The training budget has increased by 150% by 2007 and 2012. In 5 years, there is 150% increase in training budget. That will create, as a kind of a secondary impact, if you will, the ability of people to actually develop their career, develop professionally, looking for more higher level jobs, and therefore, in turn, that creates greater wealth for the family and the ability of families to actually send children to school, to higher education, etc., etc. So over a period of time, the US investment will create a better society as well, contribute to create a better society for the people involved. High salary, we have calculated that US companies actually pay their employees an average of 4.4 million rupiah per month, which is much higher than the minimum wage, if you will. Once again, that creates for the people receiving that higher salary, create disposable income, so they can improve their social conditions, and they can also contribute to the economy in the community where they live because of their ability to spend and be more sophisticated consumers. Am I running out of time? Okay, next slide please. We look at corporate social responsibility, environmental protection, the ethical behavior, ethical business behavior that companies perform in this country as companies. And that's the kind of figures we have come up with. 5.8 million was spent in 2012 in various social type of activities to contribute, to give back to the community, to contribute to health, education, infrastructure, social welfare, etc. An increase of 95% between 2007 and 2012. So there is a commitment by the US companies to actually contribute to the betterment of the Indonesian society and the community where they operate, to give back to the community. They are committed to environmental protection. They are very much committed to environmental protection. There is a particular system that rates companies in Indonesia for their compliance to environmental laws, regulations, etc. And one company got the gold, which is very rare, the gold star kind of thing, the gold rating, which means it's kind of perfect. And then all the US companies we have interviewed have achieved green and blue, which is the minimum rating for companies that actually comply with local environmental regulations. Chevron, I am allowed to mention that Chevron achieved the gold proper rank, which is fantastic for an oil and gas company. Last but not least, the importance of ethical behavior. Again, US companies comply with FCPA rules, they comply with the UK Bribery Act, which actually is a contribution, if you will, to the government policy of combating corruption and reducing the level of corruption that over years historically has developed in Indonesia. That's not a secret to anybody. There is a clear report published on a regular basis, on an annual basis, about the corruption level in each country. And so that is also the behavior, the ethical behavior of US companies contribute to support the policy and the willingness of the government of Indonesia to actually combat corruption. There's been a mention of the future investment that companies are looking at in the next 5 years. There was a figure, we collected the total figure. We certainly are not disclosing any information for individual companies. It's a total figure of $61 billion that those 35 companies are actually planning to invest in Indonesia in the next 5 years. And the areas that they are actually investing in, it's not just a extractive sector. Certainly that will remain an attractive sector because Indonesia is rich of natural resources. But there are also plans to invest in renewable energy, to invest in the manufacturing sector as the middle class of Indonesia grows. We know that in the next 20 years, most probably, in Asia itself, there will be more than 3 billion new middle-class families coming into that social status. And Indonesia will be quite large. Being a young population, being very aggressive in the way they want to actually better their social situation. The middle class in Indonesia is growing very fast and will continue to place demands on the supply side. The agricultural sector, we know Indonesia is a little kind of behind in the way they use their land. It's more traditional type of agriculture with emerging technology and the input from companies who have technology to support a better, more efficient way of growing crops and growing products from the soil. I think there will be a fantastic opportunity for Indonesia to actually become probably the food supply for the world. Now there are two major issues in the world. One is energy security and food security. Indonesia could play a fantastic role in the world to become the food supplier. 61 billion I've already mentioned from the 35 companies, and I think I've come to an end, and that's my speech.
Thank you very much, Giuseppe. Great work on the study. I'd now like to call up Pak Wija. He is the co-founder and managing director of Paramadina Public Policy Institute, and he is the man when it comes to advising us and certainly our companies in terms of how to navigate the regulatory environment, and he has some clear recommendations that came from his discussions with the companies and from their own policy considerations. Pak Wija.
thanks for the introduction and also for inviting Paramadina Public Policy to participate in this very historical research. Why it is historical? Because in the past, discussion on FDI has been done many times. But the discussion is lack of number, fact. The discussion always about it is good, it is bad, it is creating jobs. And so what if it is good? So what if it is bad? This research gives us the ability to state clearly that it creates millions of jobs. It creates 100,000 of jobs back. It creates 1.4 GDP multiplier effect. It creates 1.7 output multiplier impact. I think in this regard, I would like to say thank you for inviting us to participate in this very important research. Ladies and gentlemen, 6 months ago, IMF, World Bank, ADB predict that Indonesian economy will grow by 6.3% this year. And then just recently, they revised the forecast into 5.3. I think it shows us a few things, that we are in a very dynamic economic situation, that Indonesia's economic growth is in a declining pattern. We are far from being entering a crisis, but declining, yes. It has happened at a time when Indonesia needs high GDP growth to create more jobs, to alleviate people from poverty, and so on and so forth. We cannot expect consumption to provide support because inflation eroded people purchasing power. We cannot expect government spending because tax revenue decreased, again because of the increasing business activity. Net export we cannot expect because we experience a decrease in export. 6 major commodities that dominate our export experience a decrease in price of around 7%. And oil that account for the majority of our import. On the other way around, the price increased by 8%. So net export we cannot expect. It will help us this year, even next year. Now there is one factors, an outlier factors with this investment that continue to grow. Next slide, please. And I think it is not too far if I would mention it is probably the savior of our economy. This chart explains to us that from 2004 until 2009, in average, if we use the KPM number, FDI to Indonesia, in average, $8.8 billion per year. And then after 2009, after the global economic crisis, the number almost doubled to $17.6 billion per year. What about this year? Amazingly, if you take a look at the first half of this year, the number is already 13. So by end of this year, we can expect the number will be as high as 25. So despite all of the decrease, this number keeps increasing. Now the challenge for us is how we can ensure that this growth continue. Will it increase, stagnate, or decrease? Let me analyze the reason why we receive this amount of FDI. Based on our analysis, before 2009, FDI came to Indonesia because mainly intrinsic factors. What is intrinsic factor? Factor that is in Indonesia. What's that? Natural resources, infrastructure, human capital, and regulation. But then, after the economic crisis in 2009, global economic crisis, a lot of money coming in. Because in addition to intrinsic factor, we have what's called by relative factors. People choose Indonesia relative to other countries. Now the question is, we see that the global economic recovery is, on its way. We can see it. And soon we'll lose the relative factors. we only have the intrinsic factors. We have to improve infrastructure, we have to improve human capital. We cannot improve our natural resources because it is given by God. But of course, the easiest way and the fastest way to improve is improving the regulatory. I think with that, we are optimistic that the FDI will increase this year and the next year to come. Next slide, please. Thanks to Pak Mahendra, he already explained all the policy recommendations, even in a much better way than I can do because he has the authority. But we would like to divide our policy consideration into three parts. The first is policy uncertainty, the second is infrastructure, and the third is human capital. On policy uncertainty, policy incoherence is a very serious problem in Indonesia. I would like to explain later on. Secondly is the regulatory applicability. A lot of rules has been created but cannot be done, cannot be implemented. That's an issue. Because if we don't comply with the rule, then we're breaking law. But if we comply the rule, then we cannot do business. That's an issue. The third gap in service delivery. It's happened between central government and local government. And it's also happened between BKPN and another line ministries. Based on our survey, based on our interview with the 35 US companies, most of them has a very, very positive view about BKPN. But when it's come to dealing with line ministries and local government, problem arises. Abrupt change in policy. We are too innovative, too creative. Government cannot be so innovative and so creative because business will face problems that happen. The third, lack of regulatory clarity. It's create various disputes. We'll explain later on. Now, just to give you an example that can explain the issues on policy uncertainty. When we are talking about energy, actually we have a huge reserve of geothermal. The largest reserve in the world. Some studies say it's around 30%, 40% of the global resource. But unfortunately, only around 3% has been exploited. 3%. It's at the time when we import a lot of oil. Let me compare with our neighbor, the Philippines. Their resource is much, much lower, but they have exploited 70% of the reserve. So why it's happened? To start with, to begin with, it is because regulatory incoherence. For example, when we take a look at geothermal law, geothermal considered as a mining. But then, if you take a look at forestry law, under the forestry law, mining is not allowed to have operation in conservation forest. And 99% or probably 100% of geothermal located in conservatory forest. This conflicting rule make Indonesia fail to take advantage of the opportunity that we have. And to make things complicated, to enable company to start the exploitation, they have to get approval from the local government. From the interest of local government, it is not in our interest. If they start exploitation now, the revenue will come 5 years, 6 years down the road. I will not be Bupati at the time. So I think the government have to change because it is very strategic that approval for things like this should be in the hand of the central government. We have a long list of examples to share with you, but I would like to give you just one more example. In regard to regulation clarity, according to our anti-monopoly law, any business are not allowed to have market share of 51% or above. 51%. A couple years ago, a company because it's already become public information. I would like to mention the name. Carrefour acquired Alpha. The acquisition made Carrefour have market share of 57%. So problem arises. But then the issue is how you define market share. It is the market share of modern market or market share of the total retail market. So the law is not clear. So it's a great problem. After years, the problem resolved. But I think the cost is so enormous in terms of uncertainty, time, energy, and so on and so forth. Now, what about infrastructure and human capital? Those two are very important because it will attract FDI that can bring Indonesia to overcome our main issue. What is that? Middle income trap. Right now, FDI came to Indonesia mainly those who are looking for natural resources. We call it natural resources seeker. Secondly, those who are looking for market seeker. Market seeker, it's good, but it makes our trade balance worse because usually they import raw material and they sell the product in Indonesia. What about natural resources? It's good. It creates our trade balance positive. But it only employs minimum number of people. Actually, there's a third type of FDI investor that we actually really need. That's the efficiency seeker. Those who operate in high-tech industry, those who produce computers, software, and so on and so forth. And for that to happen, just like what happened in India, in China, in Taiwan, Malaysia in the past, they need infrastructure and human capital. And in these two aspects, we have serious concern. Infrastructure, our logistic cost is very high. It's accounted for around 20% of total GDP. So 20% of total GDP spent, around 20%. More than that, but around 20% on logistic. What if we can reallocate that into research and development? The impact will be enormous. Lack of reliable supply. If we visit hotels in various parts of Indonesia, we'll surprise because the hotel has electricity supply from the PLN, but also has genset, huge genset, because electricity, what's it called? Electricity, no, listrik mati itu apa ya? Blackout. How happen very often. So it raised the investment cost of various industries in Indonesia, not only hotel, but also many facilities like airport and so on and so forth. So availability is an issue, reliability also an issue. Human capital, low productivity level, low availability of qualified individual. Our survey gives us very interesting insight. For US company, they have no problem to recruit labor, blue-collar labor. We know the answer because they provide very good salary, 4.4 million, way beyond the minimum labor wage. But what about the high caliber human capital for manager level and above? They find difficulties. In this regard, we have to improve our human capital through education. We'll discuss that later on. Now, next slide. This slide is very important and very useful to depict why during Suharto era we are getting tired every day. Mr. Suharto open airport, open toll road, open various public infrastructure. We are getting tired of that because if you take a look at the state budget allocation, in the past 30% of the budget allocated for development. But gradually it's decreased after the political reform in 1998, and now it stays at around 10%. What's more problematic is often the budget is not fully spent. So in average over the last 5 years, there are around 11.4% of the budget on development is unspent because of various issues. On the other way around, budget on subsidies, always overspent by exactly almost the number 11%. Now, despite the increase in state budget, 36 trillions in nominal term in 1990, our budget now 1,658. If we use real number, in 1990, our state budget is 338 trillion rupiahs. Multiple by almost 5 times if you compare our budget right now. But allocation is an issue. It's not about the size of budget, but it's about the misallocation. Next slide. Now, let's talk about the potential solution for our issues. For the policy uncertainty, we have various policy considerations. The first is simplify and reduce investment procedures. If you compare Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Philippines, Thailand, in the rank of the ease of doing business index, we are lag behind. We have to improve a lot of things, but if we notice the rank very carefully, there is a strong correlation between the rank and number of procedures. If we cannot work efficiently, reduce the procedures. That will certainly help, and I don't think it's as tough as improving the human capacity and so on and so forth. Reduce the procedure. I'm very glad that Pak Mahendra very aware about that. Secondly, lastly, establishing investment dashboard. I don't want to cover the second and the third because Pak Mahendra already covered that. Establishing investment dashboard. What does it mean? The government has the NP2K to handle poverty issue in Indonesia. The NP2K is a team managed and led by the Vice President. The government also has a certain task force to handle bureaucratic reform. The team also led by the Vice President. In this regard, investment is as important as poverty alleviations and also as important as bureaucratic reform. I think Pak Mahendra need a bigger umbrella to reduce the regulatory incoherency, to deal with other ministries, to deal with local government and so on and so forth. And this should be under the coordination of at least coordinating ministry or Vice President. That's another idea. Infrastructure, increase government spending, we have discussed that. Improve the implementation of land acquisition law. This is interesting because our law has been ratified and it is a very good, very helpful actually. But again, the implementation. Based on the law, if there is a project and need land acquisition, then the seller has to deliver an overprice, and the buyer also have to mention the